Or I'm the CEO of Poland. Like, who do you want me to send a CEO to the CEO Europe? And I would then say, yes, of course. If there is a potential boss, then that works. And here, even more than the other channels, the branding, how you position yourself as a candidate, that's what will make the application successful or not. Data also shows us other trends. For example, it shows us that more projects at C-level, that there are more projects at C-level prior to the probation period than ever before. That did not happen. It started about 3 years ago, when a candidate, a C-level candidate, applies to the potential boss. They are much more probable to be offered to first work on a project and then be invited to come on board on a probation period. That's one of the things that data shows us. Data also shows us that there's more and more technology in the interviewing process at C-level. You would say, okay, I know for the junior candidates, you have recruitment games, I know that. But do you really use technology at the C-level? Yes. We have more and more candidates that receive invitations to pre-recorded interviews. What does that mean? You, as an experienced candidate, not a student, not an intern, not a graduate program, for CFO, CEO, marketing position, you name it, you get a link to a pre-recorded interview. You click on Tuesday at 10, and then you listen to pre-recorded questions. Somebody says, well, could you please introduce yourself? And you record your answer. And some softwares allow you to re-record your answer, and some say, well, that was one shot, next question. So if somebody is very picky, a 30-minute interview then turns into a 4-hour interview because you want to keep improving your answers. Now, the thing here is that who listens to your answers? Who decides whether you continue in the recruitment process? Artificial intelligence. So your recorded replies at a C-level are analyzed first by a machine, and the machine decides how likely it is that you told the truth or that you lied, how confident you are, how positive, etc., etc. And AI then recommends the top 10 or top 15 or top 20 candidates, and then HR looks at it. That would have been impossible 5 years ago, but it's already started. Another thing, when you look at technology, there is a software that takes over scheduling interviews by email with candidates, and you won't even know that you've been emailing with a robot. Fantastic. One thing that we've also seen when it comes to trends, that the overall average salaries for CEOs have decreased over the last 3 years, and that the job market has become more competitive, which means that little details have become more and more important. When I say personal branding, I'll start with what I do not mean. I don't mean PR, I do not mean pseudo experts, gurus on Facebook or LinkedIn, or not somebody who has to post every day, oh, I've had a fantastic day, I've just run 5 kilometers or something. That's not personal branding for me. Now the question, and I'm interested to see how you understand personal branding, could you please write down your definitions of personal branding? Right now, I'll give you a minute. If you need a piece of paper, let me know. I still have here some. I know I'm not supposed to walk out of the recording. Do you need a pen? Okay. Anybody needs a pen? Who has an extra pen? Okay, your colleague in the back, you have one? Okay. Anybody else missing a pen? Here, may I? Richard is lending you his pen. Oh. Great. So please write down your definition of personal branding. Is that your definition?
Yeah, that's it.
So, who would like to share? You would like to share, Richard.
Well, for me, it's very simple. It's just building a brand of myself.
Okay. Who has a different definition? Yes?
It's a continuous way, your own image and quality creation in a certain area.
Okay. So we had brand of myself. Your keywords were what? Image, quality. Yeah, that doesn't work. Quality in a certain area. Who else? Yes?
Maybe it's not a definition, but a key feature of a good personal brand. I think it's being consistent and authentic across all platforms. So assuming that I try to build my brand on many different platforms. Because nowadays, as you mentioned, AI can check it in no time that I'm not consistent.
Even AI is one thing, but even a person who is a little bit motivated and has 15 minutes to look up information on you, yes, they will find it out. What else?
I would say it's maybe like virtual name card. Including your career details, something like that.
Okay.
I would say that it's influencing on how others perceive you in the exactly intended, planned, and executed way, and doing it to serve your business or professional purpose.
Okay. Anything else?
I think this is the way people see you, your skills, and the way to manage how you look to others. And I mean specifically co-workers, business partners, your boss.
Okay. And then depending on who they is, okay, it can be voters. If we talk about politics, it can be whatever we then define. Yes? Good. When I talk about personal branding, I'm looking at the last 17 years of recruiting people. I would say it's everything. It is not LinkedIn, it is not how we dress, it's really everything. It is what we say we do and we write, and ideally, and I like what you said, to be aware of it, to do it with purpose, and to be consistent about it, to have an intention behind it, to know how are you perceived, is that how you want to be perceived, and to influence that actively. Now, what we will do, given how many of you have come today, we will not do it in big groups, but we will do it per row. If you could, I'll give you 12 minutes, if you could please come up with, imagine that you have to assess candidates and their personal brand. I mean, everything is a lot, but still, we can come up with how do you define everything? So how do you define everything? How would you define criteria to assess personal brand? And once you have that, come up with 3 examples of good personal branding and 3 examples of bad personal branding. Questions? No questions, good. I'll give you 12 minutes, and in rows, work together. You have paper, if you need pens, whatever, just let me know. Good? Fantastic, let's get started. 12 minutes.
So for sure this inconsistency.
Up to you.
So what do you think about focusing yourself as a
Nie, ale to
5 more minutes. For the last couple of minutes, make sure you come up with good and bad examples. Good and bad examples. Last minute. Make sure you have exam Ready? Let's see. Good. What criteria would you use to define personal brand so that you can then assess a personal brand of somebody? What have you come up with?
Well, for us, trustworthiness was number one, that you can trust somebody.
But he's not a fraud, he didn't lie.
But how do you know? How do you check
Word
that?
of mouth.
Word of mouth, so reputation. That's good, reputation is good.
Well, actually,
Rep-
it's very important is good balance of everything, not too much, not too little,
Of what?
of everything.
And I'm interested, what does everything mean?
Well, it's a difficult question.
Good. What else? What other criteria have you come up with?
It's really connected with what we say about the personal branding, that it's everything. So,
Yes,
yeah.
but now I want to go deeper and say, what is everything?
Yeah, I understand. It's just
Yeah.
Achievements.
Yes,
body language.
very good. Yes,
Personal network.
network, very good. What else?
Integrity and consistency.
Yes, what else? Education? Well, wait. I want to explore that.
Because we discussed about this is kind of a proof point, kind of.
Um,
the,
Level of competence, level of expertise in the field. Very good.
Yeah.
Expertise, yes. Expertise.
Differentiation from others.
Hold on. How unique somebody is.
Yes.
Yes, and?
Level of being engaged, we were thinking about like during the interview, for example, that you are talking with somebody and you see how much this person is engaged.
How would you call that criteria? Engagement? But what if,
But we also think like that somebody's like positive, open, and engaged, like it could be attitude as well.
what if you don't need somebody like that?
Well, I guess
I'm
when you see someone who's engaging, someone is interested in, engagement is important, doesn't matter what you do.
I don't believe that you don't need somebody who is engaged.
Well,
In what?
exactly, so I'm looking for the overall criteria, because there is levels. Some you might want somebody who is engaged at level 10, and some you say, well, if it's a 3, that's enough. But how would you call the above criteria? That's
Can do attitude.
maybe let's circle back to that later. What else?
Suitability?
Hmm?
Suitability?
Suitability, if it was from a job perspective, yes, then we look at competencies, maybe soft and hard skills. Move this here. Any other criteria that you have?
Self-awareness.
Self-awareness, yes.
It's a buzzword now.
So do you know it? When somebody is self-aware?
For example, if during the interview you ask somebody what are your weaknesses and strengths, then they actually have a good answer to that, and an accurate answer. Then you know if somebody's self-aware or not.
Now, how do you judge that?
I think it's something that everybody
This is for a
prepares
different lecture.
Sorry?
This is for a different lecture when we talk about that
What's the
question.
perfect answer for a question, what's your weak side?
Okay, we can talk about that in the Q&A, okay?
Okay.
Or in the next lecture about interviews and salary negotiations. What other criteria?
Not
What
showing
about
off.
recommendations from other persons?
Yes, that we have. So we have reputation, consistency,
Yeah.
body language, network.
Self-confidence.
What if you don't need somebody with self
Have you mentioned if you stand out against other?
uniqueness?
Right, okay, so-
But then not everybody wants to stand out.
I would say maybe a general good person image, like
Image.
work-life balance and things like that.
What about stress?
Well,
So it's body language.
body language, yes, it can be. We have that.
I would also add profitability. I mean, not necessarily financially, but does this personal brand serve your purpose? Does it bring you profit that you intended?
Which means, is it in line with your strategy? You need to have a strategy. Good. Good. Okay. We'll circle back to that. It took us 3 years to come up with criteria that work for our clients, meaning for our candidates that are looking for jobs. So we will go today through the criteria that we have defined, and we'll show you how we see the levels and how you can audit it for yourselves. But I'll circle back to that in a bit. Can you give examples of good personal brand?
Good or bad?
Good personal branding. Any examples? Do you have any people that you would say they have good personal
Our
brand?
Prime Minister?
Good or bad?
No,
I would say bad.
Okay, but let's talk politics. Who would say that Donald Trump has a good personal brand? Who would say he has a bad personal brand? Who would say he has both? Okay, let's see, no, but I'm really interested. Who would say he has a bad personal brand? Who would say he has a good personal brand?
Good or bad? Now, it's bad or good?
First I asked for good. It doesn't matter. The ideas are split. The thing is, when I did this lecture a couple of months ago, I asked the same question. Actually, the participants came up with Donald Trump, and one group put him into good example, and one group put him into bad example. Now the thing is, they put him in as a bad example because he's so inconsistent. But the thing is, he's consistently inconsistent. You can predict that he will be inconsistent. And this is how he has built up his entire brand. So from a branding perspective, it's brilliant. It doesn't mean that I agree with him or his politics, but he would be a good example.
It depends what's important for you.
For him,
Okay, yeah.
for him,
Right.
works for him.
But you know, it depends whether he does it on purpose or not.
I'm pretty sure he does it on
Yes,
purpose,
of course.
pretty sure. Other examples, if you think good or bad,
Stephen chose.
good or bad? Mhm.
I don't agree. After that.
Until a certain point, true. Okay? Who else?
Elon Musk, this is number one. No profits, but still.
Where?
Plus. Plus.
Well, let me put it, and I'm quoting, that's not something I said. But somebody else in a previous lecture said, Musk, unless he is high and he tweets. So as long as he knows what he's doing, he is good, but then he has these moments where he has a bad brand. And when we hear a name, Obama, Michelle Obama, we have immediate associations with them. So when somebody says Monica, her colleagues at the studies have immediate associations with her, or with Richard, etc. So these associations, as you said, it's how we are perceived, and ideally, we are perceived in a way that we want to be perceived. And that's what we want to get to. Because the anti-examples, especially when managing your career, is to suffer from the multiple personality disorder. And because there are more candidates nowadays than ever before, because it is a mature market, inconsistencies influence the recruitment process and the success of the recruitment process immensely. I can give you an example of also inconsistent behavior. True story, I have 3 CEO clients. When you look at their level of competence, I would say they're almost equal. And all 3 of them would make it onto a short list. Now, I'll describe how they are in terms of interaction. CEO number 1 is somebody, when they walk in the room, and even if everybody's busy talking, when that person walks in the room, you feel their presence. That person, it's a lady, she has charisma, she has presence, you walk in and she's like, oh, I want to talk to her. She makes this impression, like this elegant businesswoman that has this aura of competence around her, and she's just elegant and she's amazing. When you look at her, that's what you feel from her. When you talk to her, she's always well prepared, very eloquent, well-spoken, etc. But when emailing, she is not aware of the fact that she comes across, oh, this is being streamed, right? I need to find another word. She comes across as somebody abrupt, impolite. In English, the word would be beep, but she doesn't know. So in person, she's amazing, but over email, you want to kill her. And it doesn't matter if she talks to somebody, to a recruiter, to somebody else. But from a competence point of view, in person, great presence. CEO number 2, competent, very friendly, easygoing, but for some reason, until he met us, he would write all his emails and SMS in caps lock with spelling mistakes. And it took us, and this is no joke, it took us 6 months to convince him to stop writing in caps lock. And this is from like 2 years ago, this is not from 10, 15 years ago, this is recent. And then CEO number 3, an absolute gentleman. Doesn't have the presence, you would probably, when he comes in, you wouldn't probably even notice him. He'd start talking to you and you'd think he's just a random guy. Super relatable, and I can assure you, if you exchange business cards with him the next day, He will send you an email saying, listen, you know what, it was a pleasure meeting you. Not just a blah blah, but he will remember about the names of your kids, and really, he connects with people. After every interaction, after every Skype call, he sends a thank you email. But it's one that is not just a BS thank you email, but one that has a meaning behind it. That you can feel he actually says thank you. Now imagine you're the recruiter and you have 3 of those candidates, all are equally competent. Who would you recommend?
The third one.
In theory, that's a clear choice. Another thing is, candidate number 1, CEO number 1 and CEO number 2 are equally competent, but they are not aware of how they are perceived. Or what it means when they write caps lock SMS. He stopped doing it, and that's... But those are the little things. When somebody is experienced and is aware, there is a lot of self-awareness and the interview process is long. I mean, there are people who are very good at playing a certain role. Now, I know of an interview technique that I'm an absolute fan of, in terms of, I like the idea. There is a CEO on a European level who invites his shortlisted candidates to a final lunch. Now, he pays the waiter to screw up the order of the candidate because he wants to see who they really are, not who they pretended to be. And they could be consistent across all channels and have a personal, perfect brand and very aware and consistent. But then the person pays the waiter because they want to see who they really are when there's a screw up. Now the thing is, some might say, well, it's obvious they need somebody who is very kind, but maybe he needs somebody who screams at a waiter. You don't know that. But it's about the consistency to say, are they the same person that they pretended to be up until then? And now a case that I want to show you, real case, is somebody who used to be an officer at an NGO and said, I want to go into innovative HR. Now, when we look at cases of, let's say, career plans, we always look at career angels. How is that a standard level of job search and next steps? Is it medium level of complexity, or is it a difficult level of complexity? Standard means you're looking for something that you have experience in, you have competencies, and it's of your interest. So a CFO looks for the next CFO job. Medium, you're looking for a job in line with the competencies outside your key industry. That would be CFO who has now worked in production and he now wants to get into production. Difficult, you're looking for a job that is outside your core experience in industry. It is possible, but requires planning. So to be sure that we're on the same page, let's look at some examples. Let's imagine that the person we're talking about has a master in science in electronics and medical science, has spent 1 year in the medical industry right out of graduation in the early 90s, and then worked for 20 years in the telecom industry. When we met him, he was a sales and business unit director, and he said, I want to work in the medical industry. I want to be a sales engineer. Would you tell that person, oh, this is easy, that's a standard search process? Is it medium or difficult? Who would say it's difficult? Who would say it's medium? Who would say it's standard? Okay, for those who said that it's medium, why medium?
Less experience in sales.
Mm-hmm.
And medical, he has some experience in medical, long time ago, but still
Okay.
some background to build on.
Good. Now imagine all those who said medium, my arguments for why it's not medium but difficult. Imagine that somebody comes to you and says, listen, I have been making 35,000 zloty per month, and my team size is, depending on the year, between 200 and 500 people. But I don't want that anymore. Now, I don't want to have a team, and I want to make between 8 and 12,000 zloty. And I don't want to have a job, and I don't want to have any promotions for the next 2 to 3 years. Who would believe that? I'm not asking about the competencies, but I'm asking, is it realistic for that person to make such a big jump and change from high level, well-making money, managerial position to specialist and making about 20% of the current salary? Can we now agree that it's difficult?
Can you just?
Good. Again, but you need to find somebody who believes in that. Now, what about Master in Science and Architecture, at that point doing executive MBA studies, worked 5 years as an architect, is an architect, wants to be a startup consultant. Standard, medium, or difficult?
Startup in what?
Anything. Somebody who is not yet 30, so startup is a buzzword. And they are and not an IT architect, but an interior architect. Who would say difficult, medium, standard? Okay.
Maybe it's even standard if this consultancy is related to architecture.
Well, if it's related to architecture, then yes, but there are not so many startups in architecture. So without more information, you can't really say is it easy. It's definitely not standard, but probably somewhere between medium and difficult. After 5 years of studies, that person is not yet 30, currently doing the MBA, can use the project to, it's not medium, and I would say it's not standard, neither standard nor difficult. I'd say this is more or less medium. Let's jump to the next one. We have real case Astrid. Have a look at her, please.
Made up.
Good. So, and you now saw the CV as long as a recruiter would take time to read a CV.
Really?
Yes.
It's not answered.
No.
I gave you in total now 14 seconds to read a CV. This is usually how much time a recruiter would spend on your CV. Now, summarizing, she has an MA in International Relations, at the time was doing international MBA studies, has 5 years of experience in the humanitarian sector in China, Panama, Thailand, Switzerland, Tunisia, Greece, Botswana, Malawi, Hong Kong, is an associate program officer and wants to go into innovative HR in Norway. Is that standard, medium, or difficult? Difficult? Medium? I like your positive attitude. I will not ask about standard. Now tell me, between the CV and this description, what 3 words would you use her to describe her? International, somebody remembered born in 87, that's what you saw. Let's go back.
Nations.
photograph.
Bad photo.
Skype contact name.
Okay, good. And these things, if you want to know what a recruiter thinks about you, take your CV, fold it in 2. Look at the first half page, because that's usually what they see when they open up your CV, and see what you just saw with her. And usually you're already used to your own CV. Show that to somebody who doesn't know you well, your colleagues, your peers from the MBA studies, and say, what's the first 3 things that you see? How would you describe me based on that? And if the 3 words are what you want them to see and say about you, then your CV is good. But if not, that means we need to improve it. So, her perspective, she's labeled as a humanitarian, labeled NGO, difficult to rebrand, and at a point she was super frustrated. So what did we do? We said, we prepared a whole questionnaire, but the focus was, what is your experience in HR? So what is the evidence, the competence that she can actually work in an HR role? What is her IT technology experience? And what is her innovation-related experience? Because evidence is credibility. Then we also looked at the CV and the LinkedIn profile, and we said the content has to be relevant and concrete for the target group. Her previous CV was who was the target group of her first CV? NGOs, exactly. But now she wants to build two corporations. The format and structure has to be perfect. Now, the more non-standard the job search is, the more perfect CV and LinkedIn have to be. We have one tool that assesses the LinkedIn profile, the CV, and you get, let's say, 35 out of 45 points. So we express it in, I don't know, 57%. And then some would then say to us, oh, but is it really that bad that I have 2 spelling mistakes? Or that can't be that important that sometimes I have a margin to the left and then sometimes to the right, or that the text is not justified. That can't be that important. Now the thing is, if you are on a mature market and there's a lot of competition, all these details, they influence the recruitment process, because a recruiter, when the day of a standard day of a recruiter is get into the office, have about between 5 and 10 interviews, and receive between 20 and 60 CVs per day, plus business development calls, plus report writing. They have very high intensive days. So, and they have really a lot of candidates. It's not that when there is a job ad or when they source candidates that there are only 5 candidates. There are 50, 100 candidates, competent candidates. So the first, when they have to filter down the candidates, recruiters in the first couple of weeks of any recruitment process, they will look for reasons to exclude you from the recruitment process, not include you. Exclusion. So what are easy reasons to exclude somebody? Not professional photo. Oh, spelling mistakes. I know recruiters who will say executive search consultants, bad CV, bad candidate. Doesn't mean it's true, but it's a good criteria, or their good criteria to say, this is my selection of excluding candidates. I mean, it's good or bad or fair or something, but that's one way to go about it. Some will say, oh, if they work in marketing and they don't have a personalized link to the LinkedIn profile, they don't know marketing. Out. As you say in Polish, szef bez butów chodzi. So you want to make sure that they know and they apply all the rules to themselves. And some of you had already said it, we want to make sure that that when we talk about personal brand, that you are unique and the personality shows. So first step, the content has to be relevant and concrete to the target group. So here we said, we want to make sure that we don't have words like mission or some kind of software that only the NGO market knows. We want to translate that into the corporate words. Donor visits became events. Asylum seekers became end users, etc., etc. Good. Then we looked at the format and structure, and these are then summarized in percentages. And we looked at personality and uniqueness. And this was the end result. Same person.
No.
It's a non-way. I mean, non-standard CV, I would say.
In her case, yes, because that's what we needed for her. But not everybody will need it.
What is the result?
She got a job as an HR trainer in Netflix in Amsterdam,
So not in Norway, but anyway,
which,
satisfying.
based on the feedback, I said no, will never happen, but a Western European capital, yes. So we reworked the header, we reworked the summary to say what we want to say. We redid the education part, we added more credibility. So we turned something that was difficult into something that was a standard process, just because of branding. And obviously, to that is not just the CVs, then the interview preparation, etc., to be consistent. So then the LinkedIn, etc. So this is just one of the examples, and I can give you lots of other examples how branding and thinking about how do I want to position myself as a candidate, how that fits, how that then can influence it. Let me show you, if you want to do that, how you can benchmark yourselves as well. What's your role?
At the university.
No, you work at the university.
Yes.
Oh, okay. Bad example.
What about public sector?
Difficult. What's your role?
Director in technology company.
What kind of director?
Okay. Okay, sales and delivery.
Let's stick to sales director. In Warsaw?
Yes.
Good. So, location, Warsaw. So you compete against 9,140 candidates, only on LinkedIn, plus the ones who are not on LinkedIn, plus the ones who are outside Warsaw who want to move back to Warsaw, or who want to relocate to Warsaw. So when I say there are a lot of candidates, obviously I now have to filter it down, but still it's usually more than 1,000 candidates that you compete against. So if you want to have the benchmark, or if you want to get a little bit more depressed, once you get home, do the double check, because you need to benchmark and say, who am I competing against? How unique do I have to be? If you position yourself correctly, then a good pool of competing candidates, about 100, 200.
A question.
Yes.
You can put sales director and we see four names. Actually, I know one of them. Why they are on the list? So why number one is number one, not another person?
I would like to invite you to our lecture are you LinkedIn or linked out in about 2 months. Because then when we will discuss how do you make it to the top of the list. Here it's because it's my first connections. That's why they are first. But on the other hand, I have a lot of first connections for sales directors. And we'll discuss that during another lecture, because that goes deeper into how to fill out the profile to make sure to be in the first 1, 2, 3 research search results. Good. Continuing. With that gentleman, turned out that there was a story behind it, and we made sure that the profile summary said that he reads industry magazines, he attends conferences, he then started a part-time job in a technical role in a technical company, and 2 international medical equipment companies said, I will interview you. One said, I don't buy your story, you are overqualified, and I'm sure you will want to have your boss's job in no time. And one company said, I believe you, and they hired him. And it worked. But there was a lot of effort in personal branding, and that was difficult, even with the personal branding, and it took him about 1 year to make the whole transition.
Sandra Bichl is almost off.
What is off?
Yeah.
Thank you. So, as I mentioned at the beginning, We have worked now for 3 years on a personal branding model from a candidate's point of view. When you Google personal branding, you will find dozens of different models, depending on the company or the guru. So what we have come up with is this model, where we have 8 criteria. You are the second ones to see it. It has not been yet published on the internet. And I want to walk you through that criteria, through all the criterias. So how we will go about that? How do you proceed? Number one, and here I recommend everyone to really take a piece of paper or your cell phone and start making notes, because I want to walk you through all the 8 criteria so you know what to do next after today. The most important thing, and without that we don't even go further with any of our clients, is to say, what's your goal? What's your goal in 1 year, 2 years, 5 years? In terms of career goal or financial goal. The more concrete you are, the better. If you don't know where you see yourself in 3 years, for the sake of this exercise, just pick one thing, so you see the mechanism later on. So on top of, or wherever you are now in your notes, goal in 3 years, where do I want to be? If you want to make it 5 or 10 years, make it 5 or 10 years.
But it should be a career.
Career goal, yes.
Goal. All right.
Do you have that? Good. If you're not sure, pick something that you have been thinking about, just for the sake of the exercise. And now when we will look at the criteria, the mechanism is the following. At first, ask yourself, in order to achieve that role, or once I'm in that role, what level is required of me? And I'll soon show you an example. And then, second question, where am I today? And usually there will be a discrepancy. And that's the area that we know that we have to work on. So, let's start with competencies. Okay. So, does anybody want to volunteer? As an example? Are you a board member, Magda?
In NGOs, yes, but in my company.
Okay. Let's assume, we do pretend, okay? Let's pretend that Magda wants to be by 2000, let's say 21, 22. Sales director on the board in an international company at 40K base salary gross. Can we pretend that's your goal?
No.
No? Can we pretend? Pretend.
Sorry.
Just to have an example. Okay, let's just pretend. Not at a board, let's say it's a small company, but he says in 3 years, pick a company at board level. Now, on looking at the competencies, when we say from 0 to 5, and we have them defined here, that 5 is mentor level salesperson versus 1 junior specialist, where does she have to be in order to become a board member? 4 to 5. Probably even closer to 5, to be able to mentor and influence a sales team of 100 people. Good. So this is the goal. And then She at least right now has to be at a 3, otherwise she wouldn't be at a managerial level. Maybe more, I don't know her. So we see that there is a discrepancy. Now the next step would be, how do I get from 3, how do I increase that? Good. So now over to you. Think about your goals. Think about where you need to be in terms of competencies and where you're currently at. And make a note. Good. How can we improve competencies? If somebody says, okay, I see I need to improve, how can you improve competencies?
Training courses, studies.
You can get involved in different projects. Internally, sometimes you can do projects externally, but I'm not saying changing companies, but externally, for example, NGOs, somewhere to show that you have a certain competence. We said a lot is about perception. If that's something that can't wait 3 years but should happen in half a year, I highly recommend LinkedIn Learning, Udemy, and Coursera. Those are certificates, courses you can do in a weekend, in a month, in a couple of months, and add them to your CV to show evidence that you have certain competencies, even if you already have them, but there's a difference between...
Could you spell the third?
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
And Coursera, you can do courses and you get valid certificates, for example, from MIT or from Caltech or from the Buffalo University of New York. So really prestigious universities give people access to the courses. You do have to do homework and papers and projects, but it's something that you can obtain relatively easily at usually between $30 and $100, and then add to your CV. If you need to build certain credibility in an area. Good. Public speaking. Now, when it comes to public speaking, studies show that public speaking is the skill that has the biggest influence on career success in terms of advancement. So, first think about how much of public speaking, how well of a public speaker do you have to be? And public speaking also includes presenting something to the board in a foreign language. Do you need that? If yes, something. So here we defined public speaking. Level 1 would be no public speaking at all. Number 2, we said this is somebody who speaks in public irregularly and has, let's say, average level of competence. If somebody does it regularly, we'd say they're good at public speaking. If somebody pays you to speak in public, it's usually because you're good. So level 4, we said, is to be invited locally and that somebody pays for that. And number 5, in terms of public speaking, is that you are invited internationally and somebody pays for that. So think about what kind of level of public speaking you have to reach and where you're currently at. And I'll give you a moment. Thinking about Magda's example, where do you think, what kind of level of competence should she reach if she wants to be in an international company, board, Probably a 4, invited locally, because that means her industry, her country sees her as an expert in that area, and that she's good at it, and that she's visible. Now, how can you improve public speaking?
By faith.
Exactly. Absolutely true. How can we generate public speaking opportunities?
To do it for free.
Exactly. Start for free. You can join Toastmasters, TEDx. Find opportunities. Volunteer to go to conferences as a speaker. Again, Udemy, Coursera, LinkedIn Learning, they also have good material in that area. So, okay, before I start out in the public, maybe I look at some techniques. You can hire a coach that helps you, especially if you're frightened. The thing with public speaking is that's the thing that influences career success the most, but it's also the thing that people are most terrified of. When it comes to fear, it's almost as close to the fear of losing somebody close. Good. Written communication. Here we said level 1 would be non-consistent, 2 professional, 3 skillful, 4 publishes articles, 5 has written a book. Now, with the written communication, there is this assumption, okay, I have a laptop, I write hundreds of emails